my sister's wedding reception, and the screen displayed infertile, divorce failure, high school dropout, low income, single. Laughter erupted. My sister grinned. Don't laugh too much. She might cry. My mother sipped her wine. My father chuckled. Just a joke, right? I took out my phone. Begin. The room went silent. Before we begin the story, take a moment to support us by liking, sharing, and subscribing. Your support means the world to our channel and helps us spread more shocking, true stories to light. Now, let's get started. A wedding toast, a family's mockery. The ballroom was bathed in golden light, the crystal chandeliers casting a warm glow over the elegantly dressed guests. The scent of fresh roses and gourmet cuisine filled the air as laughter rippled through the crowd. This was supposed to be a celebration, Victoria's wedding reception, a night of joy, love, and unity. But for me, it was something else entirely. Seated at one of the distant tables, I swirled the wine in my glass, watching the spectacle unfold before me. My sister, radiant in her pristine white gown, stood at the front of the room, basking in the attention she had always craved. Our parents beamed beside her, the picture-perfect family, one I had never truly belonged to. And now, Victoria's voice rang out, smooth and practiced. Let's take a moment to appreciate family. The lights dimmed, and a massive screen at the front of the room flickered to life. A slideshow began, a montage of my sister's childhood, her academic achievements, her rise in my father's company. The guests clapped at every milestone, murmuring words of admiration. Then, the next slide appeared. Margaret Reynolds, infertile, divorced, high school dropout, low income, single. Laughter erupted across the room. I felt my heart slow, my hands tightening around the stem of my glass. I stared at the words emblazoned on the screen, my own face projected beside them, a cruel reminder of how my family saw me. Victoria grinned, her eyes gleaming with mischief. Don't laugh too hard, everyone, she teased. She might start crying. More laughter. My father chuckled, shaking his head. My mother sipped her wine, her lips curled in amusement. To them, this was just a harmless joke, a bit of fun at my expense. I inhaled deeply, setting my glass down with careful precision. Slowly, I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone. One tap. The laughter died. The room fell silent. And just like that, the game had changed. A double life, a hidden strength. Earlier that morning, I had woken up in my small apartment in the New York suburbs. The distant hum of traffic mixed with the sharp beeping of my alarm clock, an all-too-familiar symphony of my daily routine. I had risen, stretched, and prepared a simple breakfast, coffee and toast, nothing fancy. Then I caught the commuter train, the same one I took every day, surrounded by strangers lost in their own worlds. To my family, my life was mundane, unimpressive. I worked as a clerk at an insurance company, a dull, unremarkable job that barely paid the bills. They saw me as nothing more than a disappointment, someone who had failed to meet their impossible standards. But there was something they didn't know. Beyond the gray office walls and stacks of paperwork, I had built something powerful. Healing Hearts, a YouTube channel that had become a sanctuary for survivors of emotional abuse. Over the years, my words had reached millions, resonating with those who had been silenced and broken. People found comfort in my voice, hope in my message. They call me an inspiration. Yet, my own family knew nothing about it. They didn't know that my supposed low-income life was a choice, that I had dedicated myself to helping others rather than chasing wealth and status. They didn't know that I had built a nonprofit organization from the ground up, advocating for those who had been cast aside. They knew nothing, and that was exactly how I had wanted it. Until now, a family built on appearances. My father, Robert Reynolds, had built his empire on power and prestige. A real estate mogul, he had turned vast stretches of land in upstate New York into luxury developments, creating a name that commanded respect. He was relentless in his pursuit of perfection, demanding it not only from himself but from everyone around him, especially me. Since childhood, he had drilled one lesson into my mind. Failure was unacceptable. There were no second chances, no excuses. If I didn't measure up, I was worthless. My mother, Evelyn, was no different. Once a model, she had retained her beauty, her poise, her status. She had mastered the art of society, always knowing the right words to say, the perfect image to present. But beneath that polished exterior, she was cold, calculating. To her, success wasn't about intelligence or ambition. It was about appearance, about marrying well, about being the perfect woman. And then there was Victoria, my younger sister, their golden child. She had done everything they had asked, following their script to perfection. A degree from an Ivy League school, a high-paying job in our father's company, and now, a marriage to James Anderson, the son of an influential family. She was everything they wanted. I was everything they despised. The invitation that changed everything. 2 years ago, I had walked away from a 5-year marriage. To my family, that had been my greatest failure. They believed my husband had abandoned me because I was infertile, because I wasn't woman enough to give him children. They whispered about it behind my back, made snide comments at family gatherings, looked at me with thinly veiled pity. It never mattered that they were wrong. The truth was something entirely different. That morning, as I checked my phone, a message from Victoria appeared on my screen. You still haven't replied. I hope you're not planning to ruin my special day. Don't bring up your miserable divorce in front of everyone. James's family is refined. I exhaled slowly, my lips curling into a wry smile. I glanced at the framed certificates on my wall, the awards for my nonprofit work, the recognition I had earned through my channel, the life I had built without them. They had no idea. I sat at my desk, my fingers hovering over my phone as I typed my reply. Of course I'll attend. I'm also making special preparations for the family. Then, I opened a special app. The screen displayed the words, Healing Hearts Live. Status, ready. For 2 years, I had prepared for this moment. I had gathered evidence, consulted lawyers, and planned every detail meticulously. They thought they knew me. They had no idea what was coming. A silent arrival, a reckoning on the horizon. The Grand Palace Hotel stood like a monument to excess, its gold-trimmed doors welcoming the elite of Westchester County. Inside, the ballroom was nothing short of a fairy tale, draped in white and gold, adorned with cascading floral arrangements, and illuminated by glittering chandeliers. The guests were precisely the kind my parents surrounded themselves with: business tycoons, socialites, old-money aristocrats who spoke in hushed tones about stock markets and family legacies. To them, this was more than a wedding. It was the fusion of two powerful families, a spectacle of influence and status. I paused at the entrance, smoothing down my navy blue dress. It was deliberately modest, a stark contrast to the sequined and silk-clad women around me. I wanted to blend in, to slip through unnoticed, until the moment came when they wouldn't be able to ignore me. As I stepped inside, a voice cut through the hum of conversation. You finally came. I turned. My mother stood a few feet away, her champagne gold gown hugging her figure, her diamond earrings glinting under the chandeliers. Her expression was carefully neutral, but the slight downturn of her lips spoke volumes. She gave me a once-over, her gaze lingering on my simple attire. You could have put in a little more effort, she said. This is a special occasion. Everyone is watching. I smiled politely. Where's Victoria? At the head table, of course, she answered, already losing interest. You're at table 8 with the relatives. And just like that, she disappeared into the crowd, her perfectly curated image slipping seamlessly back into place. I exhaled softly and made my way to my assigned seat. Table 8, an afterthought. A place reserved for distant cousins and company employees who had been invited out of obligation rather than importance. No one acknowledged me as I sat down. That was fine. I wasn't here to be acknowledged. I was here to end this charade once and for all. The stage is set. The sound of clinking glasses signaled the beginning of the speeches. The master of ceremonies took the microphone, his voice echoing through the ballroom. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our bride and groom, Victoria and James. The crowd erupted into applause as my sister and her fiancé stepped onto the dance floor. Victoria's dress shimmered under the lights, every bead and pearl catching the glow. She moved with practiced grace, her smile dazzling, her laughter effortless. James held her close, looking at her as though she were the only woman in the world. To everyone in this room, this was the perfect love story. But I knew better. I felt my phone vibrate in my palm, a small message flashing across the screen. Status, ready. The dance ended. The music faded, and champagne flutes were raised. My father stood first, his deep voice carrying authority. We are honored to welcome the Anderson family into our own, he began. His speech was short and to the point, just enough warmth to appear sentimental, but laced with the unmistakable pride of a man who had orchestrated this event like a business merger. My mother followed, but her speech was more about herself than her daughter. Victoria has inherited my beauty and grace, she said, and the crowd chuckled indulgently. Finally, Victoria stood. She turned toward the guests, her smile widening. Today is the happiest day of my life, she announced. I want to thank my parents for showing me the perfect model of success. Then, she glanced at me. It was brief, so quick that no one else might have noticed, but the smirk that played at her lips told me everything. And of course, she added, I've prepared something special for my sister, Margaret. The lights dimmed. The screen brightened. And then, the slideshow began. The final humiliation, or so they thought. The first few slides were predictable. Photos of Victoria growing up, her achievements, her moments of triumph. The audience cooed over childhood pictures, applauded her degrees, admired her rise in my father's company. Then, the screen changed. Margaret Reynolds. Infertile. Divorced. High school dropout. Low income. Single. Laughter rippled through the room, starting as scattered chuckles before growing into something louder, bolder. My picture appeared on the screen, a candid shot from years ago, caught mid-blink, unflattering and awkward. The kind of image someone picks when they want to make a joke out of you. Victoria feigned innocence, placing a hand on her chest. Oh, don't laugh too hard, she teased. She might start crying. The laughter doubled. My father chuckled. My mother sipped her wine, her expression unreadable. Around the room, glasses clinked. Amused whispers passed from guest to guest. I remained still, expressionless, unmoved, because I had been expecting this, because I was prepared. The phone in my hand felt solid, comforting. The small screen still displayed those two words. Status, ready. Slowly I stood. The laughter faltered, fading into quiet murmurs as people noticed my movement. I took a deep breath, lifted my phone, and tapped the screen. Let's begin. The projector flickered. The screen went dark. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, new words appeared in bold, white letters. Healing Hearts Live. The reality of emotional abuse by family. A live viewer count flashed in the corner. The numbers climbed rapidly. 500,000, then 700,000, then over 1 million. Then, the chat messages began to flood in. Margaret, we're here for you. Finally, someone speaks the truth. Families like this need to be exposed. A single message stood out, bold and impossible to ignore. The evidence is gathered. The legal team is standing by. You are not alone anymore. David, I smiled. Then I raised my head, my voice steady, unwavering. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, allow me to share the truth about the Reynolds family. The moment of truth. A heavy silence blanketed the room, suffocating the whispers, drowning out the clinking of glasses. Every pair of eyes was fixed on me. My sister, my parents, the guests, all frozen in their seats, watching as the screen behind me came to life with something none of them had ever expected. Victoria's smirk faltered. What are you doing? She asked, her voice uneven. I met her gaze, steady and calm. Just telling the truth. The screen flickered again, and a pre-recorded audio clip played through the ballroom speakers. The voices were unmistakable. Mom, why can't Margaret have children? Victoria's voice. Her body is broken, just like her life. My mother's laughter. David was right to leave her. No man wants a woman who can't give him a legacy. A murmur swept through the crowd. A few guests shifted in their seats. I turned toward my mother, watching as she gripped her wine glass a little too tightly. My father, always composed, had turned an alarming shade of red. "That was recorded at a Christmas gathering 2 years ago," I said evenly. "You assumed I wasn't in the room. You assumed wrong." I tapped my phone again. A new clip played. This time, it was my father's voice. "Margaret is a failure. Victoria is my real daughter. Margaret was just a mistake." The oxygen seemed to drain from the room. My mother shot up from her seat. "Stop this. This is eavesdropping. It's illegal." I tilted my head, unfazed. "Actually, Mother, in New York, it's perfectly legal to record a conversation as long as one participant consents." And I consented. The screen shifted again. A video now. A grainy home recording of 16-year-old me, standing in our grand living room, beaming as I held up a silver trophy. I got second place. My father's voice was sharp. "Second? You mean you lost?" The younger me flinched, her smile wilting. "But Dad, there were 25 competitors. A Reynolds is never second," he interrupted coldly. "Second is nothing. You're nothing." The clip ended. The murmurs grew louder. Several guests, clearly uncomfortable, exchanged uneasy glances. James's parents looked horrified. His mother turned to my father. "Robert, is this?" My father remained silent, his jaw clenched so tightly I thought he might shatter his teeth. I stepped forward, scanning the room. "Some of you might be wondering why I'm doing this," I said, my voice unwavering. For years, I stayed silent. I let them paint me as a failure, a disgrace. I let them humiliate me, just like they try to do tonight. But the truth is, I am not the woman they describe. The screen changed again. It now displayed my YouTube channel, Healing Hearts, along with the words. Over 1.2 million subscribers. Founder of the Healing Hearts Foundation. Best-selling author. A hushed gasp rippled through the guests. "You thought I was nothing more than a low-paid insurance clerk," I said, looking directly at my father. "You thought I was just a failure. But in reality, I built something you could never understand. I built a movement. I built hope for people like me. People you've spent your whole life tearing down." My father finally found his voice, though it was laced with barely concealed rage. "You always wanted attention," he spat. "This is just another one of your dramatic acts." I let out a quiet laugh. If I wanted attention, I could have done this a long time ago. The difference is I have proof, and I wasn't done yet. A truth they never saw coming. The ballroom doors swung open. A hush fell over the room as David Clark stepped inside. The once awkward young man I had married years ago had transformed. He carried himself with quiet confidence, his tailored suit crisp, his presence commanding. He strode past stunned guests, stopping beside me. Evelyn paled. My father stiffened. David met my gaze. "Margaret," he said, his voice steady. "I didn't leave because you were infertile. I left because I couldn't stand watching your family destroy you. And that was my weakness. I should have fought for you. I should have protected you." I nodded, understanding the regret in his eyes. He turned to the crowd, his voice growing louder. "After the divorce, I threw myself into my work. I became the CEO of a successful technology company. But even after all that, nothing compared to what Margaret has built." He gestured to the screen. "What she's done for survivors of emotional abuse. I've been supporting her organization for the past 2 years. I watch her lift people up, give them hope, help them heal." A murmur swept through the guests. Some looked embarrassed, others guilty. And then, from the back of the room, more people stood up. Women, men, people I had met through Healing Hearts. People whose stories had once been silenced. One of them, a woman with kind eyes and a trembling smile, spoke first. "Margaret gave me the strength to leave an abusive household," she said. Her words saved me. Another person, a man in his late 30s, added, "I thought I was alone until I found her channel. She made me realize I wasn't broken. I was just surrounded by the wrong people." One by one, they spoke. And one by one, my family's carefully constructed reality crumbled. James, who had been silent this entire time, suddenly stood up and moved away from Victoria. He hesitated, his voice barely above a whisper. Then, stronger, I can't do this. I can't marry into this family. Victoria's face drained of color. What? James shook his head, his voice filled with something dangerously close to disgust. I've seen how you talk about Margaret, how you mock her, belittle her. And now, seeing all this, seeing the truth, I don't want to be part of it. He turned to his parents, who were already gathering their things, clearly eager to leave. Victoria stumbled forward, her perfectly crafted world unraveling. James, wait. But he was already walking away. My father looked ready to explode. My mother's mask of indifference had cracked. And Victoria, my perfect, beloved sister, looked utterly lost. I let out a slow breath. I had one more truth left to reveal. The real reason my marriage ended wasn't because of me, I said softly, my eyes locked on Victoria's. And neither was the infertility issue. Her expression shifted from confusion to panic. I held her gaze as I spoke the final words that shattered everything. I'm not infertile, I said, my voice ringing through the room. But you, Victoria, you are. A gasp, a sharp inhale, a shudder. Victoria's entire body went rigid. I continued. You and James have been trying for a baby, haven't you? And failing. I turned toward my father, whose hands were now clenched into fists. Dad's genetic abnormality? The one he always hid? It only passes to female children. Understanding dawned in Victoria's eyes. You're lying, she whispered. I shook my head. No, Victoria. You spent years calling me defective, but the truth is the defect was never mine to bear. My father collapsed back into his seat. My mother covered her face with shaking hands. And my sister, for the first time in her life, was speechless. The fall of a dynasty. The ballroom was silent. Not a single whisper, not a single breath. Victoria stood frozen in place, her perfectly sculpted world collapsing around her. Her wedding, her future, her identity, all built on a lie, all unraveling in real time. I watched as realization dawned in her eyes. The truth was unbearable. Why you're lying, she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. I tilted my head, my expression calm. You know I'm not. James's mother turned sharply to my father. Is this true? She demanded, her voice sharp with barely restrained anger. You have a genetic condition, and you hid it. My father, the man who had always been in control, always dictated the narrative, now sat slumped in his chair, his face pale, his lips pressed into a thin line. For the first time in my life, he looked small. James exhaled shakily, running a hand through his hair. His entire body was tense. He looked at Victoria like she was a stranger. You knew, didn't you? His voice was quiet, but the accusation in it was deafening. Victoria shook her head frantically. No, I didn't know. I swear. James took a step back, his face unreadable. Doesn't matter, he said. What matters is that I can't trust you. Tears welled in Victoria's eyes. James, please, she whispered. But he had already turned away. His parents followed, and just like that, her perfect engagement was over. The last words of a fallen king. The whispers grew louder, an unstoppable tide of judgment crashing over my family. The Reynolds name, once untouchable, was now in ruins. My father, the man who had spent his life crafting an image of dominance and success, finally snapped. He stood abruptly, slamming his fists onto the table. The force rattled the champagne glasses, silencing the crowd. Enough of this, he roared. His face was red with fury, veins bulging at his temples. He turned to me, his eyes burning with hatred. You've humiliated this family enough, Margaret, he bellowed. What do you want? Money? A public apology? What will make you stop this circus? I met his gaze without flinching. You don't get it, do you? My voice was calm, steady, unshaken. I took a step forward. For the first time in my life, I loomed over him, not the other way around. I don't want your money, I said softly. I don't want your apology. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice just enough for only him to hear. I want you to live in the world you created, I whispered. His expression flickered. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. I straightened and addressed the crowd. My father built his empire by controlling people, I said. By breaking them, by making them feel worthless. But in the end, he is the one who lost everything. I turned back to him. This is your legacy, father. This is what you've built. His chest rose and fell heavily, his fury slowly giving way to something else. Something I had never seen before. Defeat. The final goodbye. Victoria was sobbing now, her head bowed, her hands shaking as she gripped the edge of the table. My mother sat stiffly beside her, her hands clasped in her lap, her face an unreadable mask. But the damage was done. James and his family had already left. The guests, once eager to rub elbows with the Reynolds name, were now shifting uncomfortably, some whispering, some standing to leave. The power my family once held was slipping away, one person at a time. I turned to the camera one last time. Over 2 million people were watching. And so, I spoke the words I've been waiting to say for years. To those of you watching, I said, my voice unwavering. If you have ever been made to feel small, if you have ever been told you are not enough, know this. I took a deep breath. You are enough. You are worthy. And you are not alone. Then, I ended the live stream. And with that, it was over. The Reynolds family, the dynasty built on power, wealth, and cruelty, had finally fallen. And I was finally free. 1 year later, Barnes & Noble, New York City. The bookstore was overflowing with people, the lines stretching out the door and around the block. Cameras flashed, news crews hovered, and readers clutched copies of my new book, Silent No More, eagerly waiting for a signature. I had spent the past year traveling, speaking, advocating. Healing Hearts had grown into a nationwide movement. My book was a bestseller. My voice, once silenced by my family, had become one of the loudest in the country. At the signing table, I smiled as I greeted each reader, listening to their stories, sharing in their victories. Beside me, David sat, his presence steady, grounding. Though we hadn't remarried, our bond was stronger than ever, a partnership built on mutual understanding and respect. And a few feet away, standing quietly in the background, was someone unexpected. Victoria. She was dressed simply, jeans, a sweater. No designer labels, no over-the-top makeup. She wasn't here for attention. She was here for something else. When the crowd thinned, she finally stepped forward. She hesitated, then took a shaky breath. I read your book. I nodded. And she swallowed hard. It was eye-opening. A pause. Then, her voice cracked. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For a moment, I didn't respond. The wounds were deep. The past could never be erased. But healing? That was possible. I exhaled slowly. Healing takes time, Victoria, I said honestly. But it's not impossible. She nodded, her eyes glistening. And as she stepped back into the crowd, not as an enemy, but as someone trying to change, I realized something. I had spent years believing I was a failure, a mistake, a disappointment. But now, I was proof that even the most broken voices can rise. I opened the next book in my stack, smiled at the reader in front of me, and wrote the words I had once needed to hear. Your voice has power. Don't be silent anymore. And with that, I sign my name, Margaret Reynolds. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe for more real-life family dramas. Let me know in the comments what you think about today's story. Was it fair or totally messed up? See you in the next one.